Horror stories from abandoned areas. 4 scary true accounts. Story 1, submitted by Daniel R. from Northern Arizona. I grew up in a dusty border town where most people either worked at the gas station, the school, or out on the ranches stretching toward the mountains. When I hit my late 20s, I started driving long-haul freight for a construction supplier out of Flagstaff. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than anything back home. Most nights I slept in my cab. Most days I crossed miles of empty desert where the only landmarks were battered road signs and sun-faded billboards for motels that probably hadn't existed in 20 years. There's a stretch of highway out near the petrified forest where almost nothing stands anymore. Just a few skeletons of places that once served travelers before the interstate bypassed them. The company had a distribution point out there, basically an old concrete shed with a loading dock behind a chain-link fence. We delivered pallets of aggregate, spare tools, and cement bags for a small crew that did erosion control work. I hated stopping there because the area always felt off, a kind of flat silence that swallowed sound instead of holding it. But that night was different. I was running late, pushing past 10 p.m. After a delay in Winslow, and the high desert had gone dark in that absolute way it does in winter. Even with my headlights on full beam, the road looked soft, like the darkness wanted to press in on the glass. I saw the first abandoned motel about a mile before the turnoff, a long, low building with its roof collapsed in the center, the parking lot cracked open by tufts of dry weeds. I'd passed it dozens of times, but I'd never seen its old neon sign flicker the way it did that night, as if electricity were pulsing weakly through dead wiring. I slowed as I approached the fenced-off shed. The gate stood open, which was strange. They always kept it locked after dusk. I figured maybe the crew had stayed late, doing inventory. But the yard was dark, and there were no trucks, no voices, nothing. Just that thudding silence. I pulled my rig inside, set the brake, and stepped out into the cold. Wind scraped something across the concrete. Sounded like plastic. When my eyes adjusted, I saw it was a glove. Just one. Orange, the kind the crew used. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, half expecting it to be warm, but it was cold as bone. The shed's door was ajar. Not much, just an inch, but enough for warm air to slip through. The crew always shut it tight. I pushed it open, calling out, "Hello? Delivery for Site 219. It echoed once, then stopped. Even my own breathing felt smothered. Inside, the place looked normal at first. Pallets stacked against the wall, metal shelving lined with buckets of bolts and tie rods, coils of cable. But the lights weren't on. They flickered once overhead as if trying to wake, then died with a soft, electrical pop. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam cut a narrow, shaky path across the concrete floor. There were footprints, many, all the same work boot tread. But they weren't going toward or away from the door. They circled the room, over and over, dense overlapping loops, as though someone had walked the same path again and again all day. I followed them until they veered into a shadowed corner. Something was scratched into the wall, long looping grooves. At first I thought it was graffiti. Then I saw the faint red smears along the edges. Blood. Old, dry, almost brown. A chill went up my spine. I backed away, nearly tripping over a stack of PVC pipe. That's when I heard it. Something shifting behind the shelving. Metal rattled once, sharply. "Hello?" My voice cracked. No answer. I tried to convince myself it was a wild animal. A coyote, maybe, but nothing out here would willingly walk into a lit space and get trapped. My pulse thudded hard against my throat. I cleared my throat and said louder, "If someone's hurt, I can call emergency. Just say something." A low scraping sound dragged across the floor. I stepped back slowly, trying not to make noise. When my boot touched the doorframe, I panicked and turned too quickly. The door swung with me and slammed shut hard enough to make the whole shed ring. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. Inside the shed, something inhaled, a full, wet breath. I pressed my back to the door, gripping the handle until my knuckles went numb. "Who's there?" The shelves trembled, not like something bumped them, like something pushed upward from below. Then, from behind the nearest shelving unit, a shape rose. Slowly, almost delicately, as though lifting its head after crouching. My light caught a flash of reflective orange fabric. A safety vest. "Mike?" I whispered. He was the site lead, a big guy who always wore an orange vest even when he didn't need to. But the figure didn't answer. It leaned slightly, as if its spine weren't working right. The vest sagged strangely, hanging off something too narrow, too long. I lifted my phone higher. The beam slid across the vest, then onto the thing wearing it. The face wasn't right. It was like someone had stretched a human face over a shape that wasn't meant to have one. The mouth hung open, not wide, just slack, the way a mask's mouth looks when no one's inside it. The eyes were the worst. No whites, just two deep pits, as if the sockets extended too far back into the skull. It took one jerky step toward me. I don't remember making the sound that tore out of my throat. I just remember slamming my shoulder into the door again and again until something gave way. The metal screeched, the latch snapped, and I tumbled backward into the gravel outside. I didn't wait. I sprinted to my truck, climbed in, floored it. The shed shrank in my mirrors, and for a second, just a second, I saw something standing in the doorway. Not chasing, not waving, just watching. The next morning, when I told the dispatcher, he stared at me like I'd lost my mind. He said the crew had already reported for duty at another site that morning. All accounted for. No one injured. No one even in the shed last night. I didn't argue. I just told him he'd need a new night driver. That stretch of highway still feels empty when I pass it, but sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I see a flicker of orange near the abandoned motel. And when I blink, it's gone, as if it had slipped back into the darkness that shaped it. But I always keep driving faster because I can't shake the feeling that one night it'll be standing a little closer to the road, waiting for me to stop again. Story 2, submitted by Lacey M. from Western Pennsylvania. There's a place off Route 22 that locals call the Granite Pit, though there isn't much granite there anymore. Just a scarred basin full of rainwater, weeds, and rusting machinery half buried in mud. The quarry shut down before I was born, and by the time I was a teenager, it had already become the kind of spot you dared friends to explore at night. The property wasn't fenced, and the no trespassing signs were so sun-bleached they were practically polite suggestions. When I was 32, divorced, and back living in my hometown, the Granite Pit was the only place I could go when I needed to be alone. Not for nostalgia, God no, but because no one else ever went there anymore. Even the local kids preferred abandoned malls over muddy holes in the earth. I'd park my old sedan near the service road and walk down the sloping path to the basin. By then, tall pines had started creeping in around the edges, their roots gripping the quarry walls like fingers. The water pooled at the bottom was a murky green, dotted with the floating shapes of leaves and dead insects. Ugly, sure, but peaceful, until last fall. It was late September, one of those evenings cold enough to make your breath visible, but still warm enough that you could pretend summer hadn't fully died. I'd been having a rough week at work. Assistant manager at a hardware store doesn't usually mean conflict, but I had to fire a kid who reminded me of my little brother. I needed space, quiet, a place where my thoughts could echo without hurting anyone. I took my usual path along the rim, running my hand along the rusted guardrail that hung in ragged sections above the pit. My fingers brushed something sticky. Sap, I thought, until I looked closer and realized it was too dark, too tacky. Blood, maybe. But I didn't want to admit that. I followed the smears with my eyes and saw more of them on the concrete ruins ahead, streaks leading toward a collapsed maintenance shed. Something about it didn't sit right. This place didn't get visitors. Hunters stuck to the woods. Teenagers went to the mall. Whatever left those marks didn't come here by accident. I should have turned around. I know that now. Instead, I walked toward the shed. The structure was barely standing. 3 walls, a canted roof, and a doorway with no door. The air inside smelled stale and metallic. When I aimed my phone's flashlight around, I noticed piles of stone core samples still stacked in crates, as though the workers had abandoned everything halfway through a shift decades ago. But there was something else, something newer. In the corner lay a torn jacket, bright blue nylon, the kind joggers wear, and a shoe, a running shoe, the kind with reflective strips that glow like tiny eyes when light hits them. My pulse hammered behind my ribs. I crouched, reaching toward the shoe, but stopped when I heard footsteps outside the shed. Slow, heavy, too slow to be human. I froze. Even my breath felt loud. The footsteps paused just beyond the wall. Then came a sound, almost a sniff, but not quite, more like something dragging air through a cracked opening. I backed toward the far wall, trying to silence the crackling of gravel under my boots. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam jittering across the ceiling. That's when I noticed the scratch marks, thin, desperate gouges etched into the wood supports. Some were high, some low, but all of them were frantic and uneven. A shadow passed across the doorway. I raised my phone slowly. The figure outside was tall, too tall. Its shoulders came nearly to the top of the doorway, and they moved with a strange tension, like the muscles underneath weren't arranged correctly. I couldn't see its face, but its silhouette was wrong. Narrow head, long arms, a slight bend to the spine. It stood there for a long moment, and I swear the air grew heavier, like the entire pit was holding its breath with me. Then, something in the shed clicked. A pebble? A crate shifting? Whatever it was, it made the silhouette jerk its head in my direction with a suddenness that made bile rise in my throat. I bolted out the opposite wall. There was a gap where the boards had rotted, stumbling into the scrub brush. Twigs snapped. My breath tore from my lungs. I didn't dare look back at first, but when I did, I saw it crawling through the shed. Crawling. Its limbs bent outward like an insect's, elbows splayed at odd angles. Its hands, if you could call them that, dug into the dirt, pulling its body forward with slow determination. The reflective strips on the abandoned shoe caught the light, shimmering faintly beside it, as though it had dragged the shoe there, as though it wanted me to find it. I sprinted up the embankment toward the service road, slipping twice, skinning my knee. Behind me, the sound of it climbing, scraping, pulling, climbing, followed like a sickness. When I reached my car, I fumbled the keys so badly I had to scoop them off the asphalt. I slammed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and hit the headlights. For a moment, nothing. Then, at the top of the hill, just at the tree line, two pale shapes reflected back at me. Not eyes, too far apart, too flat. Patches of something on its face that caught the light like wet stone. It didn't move toward me. It just watched. I drove home shaking so hard the wheel rattled in my hands. I slept with all the lights on. The next morning, I drove by the entrance to the service road. Something had collapsed there during the night. A tree, or maybe an old wooden barrier, but it completely blocked the path. The pit was cut off, and I realized something that made me cold all over again. The jacket and shoe weren't there when I walked by 2 days earlier. Something had brought them to the pit. Something had left them where I'd find them, like it wanted me to follow. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those reflective strips staring back at me from the trees. And I wonder how long it watched me before I ever noticed it, and whether it still remembers the sound of my footsteps leaving the pit. Story 3. Submitted by Marcus J. from South Dakota. The abandoned missile silos outside Rapid City were the first places my friends and I explored once we got our driver's licenses. Everyone knew they'd been decommissioned in the early 90s, sealed off, and left to rot on government land. Some had been filled in, some welded shut, but a few, at least according to rumors, were still accessible if you knew where to look. By the time I was in my late 30s, those old adventures were nothing but half-fogged memories I told my kids when they begged for scary stories. But last winter, after my divorce and a bout of insomnia that just wouldn't quit, I started taking long nighttime drives. You know the kind, just to get away from the walls of your own house. One night I ended up near the old grounds again. Snow had fallen earlier, leaving the prairie white and brittle. I parked on a turnout and stepped out, letting the silence soak through me. That's when I noticed faint tire tracks, not mine, leading toward a low rise where one of the silo entrances used to be. Something in me tugged. Nostalgia, maybe, or restlessness, or just the part of you that wakes up when you're alone in a place you shouldn't be. I followed the tracks on foot. They led to a steel hatch half hidden under snowdrift. The government had welded most of these shut decades ago, but this one? The welds were ground off, cleanly, recently. I crouched and brushed away the snow. On the handle, rusted stiff, were fresh fingerprints. Human, maybe even from that day. My breath crystallized in the beam of my flashlight as I pulled the hatch open. A smell drifted out, cold metal and something faintly sour like damp carpet in an old basement. A steel staircase spiraled downward. My footsteps echoed way too loud, like the silo was swallowing sound and spitting back only the parts that made me uneasy. The deeper I went, the warmer the air grew, which didn't make sense. Nothing below should have been heated. At the bottom, the corridor stretched left and right, the concrete sweating from decades of condensation. Pipes ran overhead, some dripping steadily. My flashlight flickered once, but steadied when I slapped it. That's when I heard it. A voice, not words, just a low murmur, like someone whispering to themselves behind a closed door. I should have left. I know that now. But I followed the sound, my boots splashing through shallow puddles, my shadow skittering along the walls. The voice grew clearer, not in volume, but in shape, like it was forming syllables, trying them out, as though whoever it belonged to hadn't spoken in a long time and was relearning how to make sounds. I turned a corner and found a room with the door cracked open. Light, dim, yellowish, leaked out in a narrow strip. The hum of old fluorescent bulbs buzzed underneath the whispering. I nudged the door with my boot. Inside, the room looked like a makeshift camp. Bedroll, cans of food, a small battery-powered lantern. Someone had been living down here, recently, but they weren't here now. What was here, though, was a map, spread across the floor, weighed down by nuts and bolts. It was a blueprint of the entire silo system, every tunnel, every maintenance shaft, every emergency exit, and marked in dark ink were several X's. Not random, deliberate. Places deep underground. Places no one should want to go. A sudden thump echoed from the hallway. I snapped upright. The murmuring stopped. I switched off my flashlight and crouched, letting my eyes adjust to the lantern's faint glow. A shadow moved past the doorway. Slow, dragging one foot. The step was uneven, like someone hadn't used their legs correctly in a while. I held my breath. The shadow paused. Then a soft, wet breath came from the other side of the door. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I thought I could scare whoever it was, convince them I wasn't a threat. But I whispered, "Hello?" Silence answered. Then the handle turned. Millimeter by millimeter. The door eased open, only an inch at first, then another. What stood in the doorway wasn't exactly a person, but it wore human clothing, a parka, jeans, boots caked in mud. Its posture was wrong, like the joints were too loose, too flexible. Its head tilted at a slow, unnatural angle, and its mouth moved before any sound came out, stretching wide as though testing the limits of skin. When the whisper finally slipped out, it wasn't a voice. It was a mimicry, a brittle, broken attempt to copy mine. Lo. I stumbled backward. The thing stepped inside, its boots squelching with water. Up close, its skin looked thin, papery, mottled with dark patches, and its eyes, God, they were milky, unfocused, but searching, like it recognized shapes but not meaning. I bolted. I don't remember navigating the tunnel system. I just remember the thundering of my heartbeat, the scrape of my shoulders against concrete, the rising certainty that I wasn't alone in the dark, that something was behind me, moving faster than it had any right to. When I reached the stairs, a hand, or something like a hand, grabbed the back of my coat. The grip was wet, cold, impossibly strong. I jerked forward so hard the fabric tore, sending me sprawling upward. I didn't stop, not when my legs cramped, not when the metal steps rang like bells beneath me. I burst into the cold night air and slammed the hatch shut, bracing my whole weight against it. It didn't try to open it, but I heard it. Right on the other side. Breathing. Trying out new syllables. Cuss. I ran to my truck and didn't look back. Didn't sleep for 2 days. Didn't tell anyone what happened. A week later, I drove past the turnout again. The hatch was open. Snow melted around its edges as though something warm had climbed out recently. And for the first time since I was a kid, I realized the prairie wasn't empty, not the way we assume it is. Something learned to live down there. Something learned to speak. And that night, it learned my name. I still take drives when I can't sleep, but I never go near those fields again. Not after hearing my name echoed in a voice that wasn't human, rising up from a place built to hide things we were never meant to find. Story 4, submitted by Caroline S. from Southern Oregon. I used to photograph abandoned places for fun, old barns, forgotten diners, shuttered motels along back highways. Nothing fancy. I liked the quiet of it, the way a place that used to be alive could feel frozen mid-breath. After a while, friends started sending me tips. There's an abandoned ranger station up in the Siskiyous, someone told me last spring. Used to be a wildfire outpost. No one's been there for decades. That was enough to get me in my Subaru before sunrise. The road up the mountain was a mess. Mud, slick patches, fallen branches. When the GPS lost signal, I followed the directions someone posted on an old urban exploration forum. Half the comments insisted the ranger station wasn't real, or that it burned down long ago. But one person, someone with a username I didn't recognize, had posted a photo of a narrow trail with an old wooden sign buried in undergrowth. I found the trailhead around mid-morning. The air smelled like cold pine and damp soil. A moss-rotten picnic table slumped near the entrance, its wood caving in like ribs. I should have stopped there, taken a nice landscape shot and called it a day. But I didn't drive 2 hours to turn around. The trail wound upward, switchback after switchback. Bird calls echoed overhead, but somewhere between the third and fourth bend, even the birds went quiet. Dead quiet. My footsteps sounded too crisp on the soft forest floor, as if the trees themselves were listening. After nearly an hour, I saw the roofline through the branches, angled metal, rusted, barely clinging to the frame. The ranger station sat on a flattened patch of earth overlooking the valley. A wooden porch leaned outward like it wanted to throw itself downhill. The windows were boarded, the door padlocked. A heavy radio antenna lay snapped across the roof, wires dangling like veins. I circled the building, snapping pictures. The forest pressed close on all sides. The loneliness of it felt heavier than I expected, an old, stale loneliness, like something had been waiting too long for visitors. Behind the building, I found the cellar doors, thick wooden planks reinforced with metal straps. Someone had pried one loose years ago. The lock was busted, the boards warped from weather. They gaped open just enough for me to see a black square leading down. Normally, that's where I'd stop. I had rules. No underground spaces, no crawling through holes, nothing that requires squeezing. But the cellar steps were wide, concrete, and perfectly visible in the light slicing through the gap. So I went in. The air shifted immediately, cooler, denser. My camera lens fogged for a second. Shelves lined the walls, jars of nails, cans of paint, dusty tools. A broken cot lay slumped in one corner, a collapsed wood stove in another. Then I noticed something strange. In the far corner, someone had nailed dozens, maybe hundreds, of Polaroids directly to the wall, all of them the same size, all of them arranged in long, crooked rows, like a mosaic of moments no one wanted to remember. At first I thought they were photos of wildlife, owls, deer, bears. But when I stepped closer, my stomach tightened. They were photos of people. More specifically, the same person, repeated, over years. A woman, always in different poses, different seasons, different clothes, sometimes smiling at the camera, sometimes half-turned as if she didn't know she was being photographed, sometimes asleep, sometimes standing in a crowd with her head slightly blurred like she'd moved fast at the wrong second. Her face was ordinary, familiar even. I couldn't place why. Maybe she had one of those soft, common features. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was wrong in each picture. Not obvious at first, just small inconsistencies. Her shadow at the wrong angle, her reflection too faint, the background skewed as if the world tilted away from her. There were dates written on the bottom of each Polaroid, in marker, shaky handwriting. The earliest date was 1984. The most recent, 3 days before I arrived. My breath stuttered. The woman in the latest photo stood on a forest path, one that looked almost identical to the one I'd taken up the mountain. Her expression was flat, distant, like she was listening to something behind the camera. I stepped back, heart pounding. That's when I noticed a small wooden chair in the corner facing the Polaroid wall. An old camera tripod stood in front of it, as if someone sat there and stared at the photos for hours. The cellar creaked overhead. Then again, slow footsteps. I froze. Someone was in the station above me. I could hear weight shifting on the old boards. Careful, deliberate steps, moving toward the back of the building, toward the cellar doors. I backed into the shadows beside a shelving unit, pulling the camera strap tight to keep it from swinging. My pulse hammered so loud I thought whoever was above could hear it through the floor. The footsteps stopped right over the cellar entrance. Light dimmed. Someone, or something, was blocking the gap. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the cellar doors creaked inward. A sliver, then a bit more. My breath felt trapped in my throat. A head appeared at the top of the stairs. A woman's head. The woman from the photos. Her hair hung limp and stringy, as if still damp from rain. Her eyes, God. They were blank. Not empty exactly. Just unfocused, like she was looking through me instead of at me. She didn't walk down the stairs. She slid. Her feet didn't seem to know how to move naturally. They dragged, toes scraping concrete. Her hands hung loosely at her sides until she stopped halfway down and tilted her head, listening. I clamped a hand over my mouth. She made a soft, breathy sound, like an exhale that forgot how to begin. Then she turned her head toward the Polaroid wall. Her shoulders rose slightly, as if she recognized the arrangement. Then she turned toward me. Even though I knew I was hidden in shadow, she stared right at the spot where I stood. Her lips parted, not like she was about to speak, more like she was trying to remember what speaking was. Something primal inside me snapped. I bolted up the stairs, hitting the cellar doors with my shoulders so hard they swung outward. I heard her feet slap the concrete behind me. Fast now, faster than should have been possible. I burst into the forest, branches whipping my face, roots tripping me. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The trail blurred under my feet, and the air burned in my lungs. I reached my car and tore out of there, mud spraying behind me. By the time I hit the main road, I was sobbing. Not from fear. From the sickening certainty that I'd seen her somewhere before, years ago maybe, during a camping trip or walking through a crowd. Maybe in a grocery store aisle. Maybe on a bus behind someone else. The next morning, I scrolled through the Polaroids on my camera. They were all crisp, except one. A single photo, taken halfway up the trail, showed the trees bending slightly, as though something had been standing just behind me. Something the camera almost caught. Something shaped like a woman with an ordinary, forgettable face. I deleted the photo. But sometimes, in a parking lot or a grocery store or on a sidewalk at dusk, I catch sight of a woman with blank eyes and wet hair and a soft, unfocused stare. And every time, I wonder if she's remembering me too.